Well, welcome everyone to the track on policy, governance, and thinking as if democracy matters. This is being presented by the Forum on Democracy. And Forum is the next one.
You want to click?
Yep. We're just getting used to the clicking here, sorry. The Forum on Democracy, a small group of very, very concerned individuals who are focused on the work that is required to revitalize and restore the American experiment in democracy. We recognize several things here. We recognize the democracy side of the equation is basically missing in action. It's very fragile and it needs a lot of work today. We also recognize that the excuse me, oppression and tyranny that we fought against in 1776 is still with us. It's just in a different form. We need to vitalize, revitalize, and catalyze the people of this country to really energize them and to help them to really realize the genius of the American people as we go forward in order to fight the forces that are surrounding us today. So how can we build on the past 250 years and create something to go forward in the next 250 years? Okay. The track itself is organized into 4 panels throughout the entire day today. The first panel is called Rediscovery, and that's where we pose the question, who are we and why are we? Discovering the genius of the American experiment in democracy, the design of that experiment. The second panel is on rethinking. Where are we today? What are the social dynamics that are encompassing us today that we are looking at and which have brought us, particularly in the last 70 years, to our situation concerning democracy, which is in a pretty fragile state. The third panel is on reimagining. Where do we want to go? What are the tools, what are the methodologies that can take us forward in reimagining that American experiment? And finally, rebuilding. What do we want to do? What is being done right now? How can we rebuild that American experiment and take it forward for another 250 years? Next. Thank you. So our first panel is called American Democracy. Makes absolutely no sense until. And we thought we'd start out with a little bit of an image here. As you can see, we have a group of scientists in a cube, and they're going from A to B, very linear types of thinking. The problem is, we are a complex society today. If you come outside of that cube, you see the complexity all around us in a living whole system. So that A to B, that linear thinking, does not really begin to address the complexity of our society. What do we do about this? Next. Yep. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that'll help. Thank you. Next.
You want to read that?
Yeah. Okay. None of us see the system. We see our own part based on our own background and history. And we all think we see the most crucial part. That's from Peter Senge. Very, very, very pointed words about systems and our systems of believing and seeing.
For those in the hybrid world, we have a landing space for you where you can be putting your comments. So I will give you the URL to go to. We actually have live people here today that have said that they are not robots. And so it's very important that we get a dialogue going, because what we've done over the past 4 years, a small group of concerned citizens, is figure out what the founders of this country believed in because they read the Stoics. And the Stoics said, everything has two handles. Make sure you pick it up by the right handle. And I would say what we're doing today is picking up our problems of democracy and the languages that we're using by the wrong handles. And so what we're trying to do is create the handles that we can actually get traction to move things. Because in America, it's not where you stand, it's how we move together as a people. And that's what is different and missing today. So think about what is the right handle. And so what we're going to be talking about today is a lot of distinctions. But this landing page, you go to our website, which is called the forum.us.org, and put a little slash and just put in as if. Each of our panels has its own landing site, and it's a rolling blog, so you can see what other people are writing. And that's sort of the history of what the questions, because we don't have everyone together to ask those questions. So we can actually use technology to help us and not corral us, predict where we're going. Very different than the message we got in the first presentation today about AI and its predictive technology based upon the past.
So in the next slide, we raise the question, what happens when you don't pay attention to democracy?
Did I kill it?
Pressing.
Interesting.
Next one. There you go.
There we go. Is that it? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna basically give you some stories to basically
So I
come up
think
with
the
where.
screen is not, the screen
we-
for the online participants is not shifting. We still see the Uncle Sam needs our help. Sorry to interrupt.
You only see the Uncle Sam?
Yes, yes.
It has to be working through the system. What's happening here on our system here?
I think you might have shared the PowerPoint program and not the presentation. That could be it.
I'm not sharing it. The technician in the back
Okay.
is. If he's
We
working
see
on it.
your PowerPoint, but we, oh, okay, okay.
Okay, so they're working on that, but let me just continue. The title we have today was about thinking, policy, governance, all those all fine things. But as if democracy matters. And how do we think about that? How do we grasp it? How do we handle that? And so I gave you the Stoics idea that basically everything has two handles there. And make sure you pick it up by the right one. Let me give you two examples as if democracy matters. We fought World War I. In World War I, 84% of the land mass of America was under colonial control, 84%. And a few others like Americans said, we don't believe in that colonialism stuff. And the role of America in decolonizing the world is a story that needs to be told. But basically, at the end of World War I, they had the Treaty of Versailles. This was in the Hall of Mirrors. And here's the story. A marketing man from Madison Avenue said, hey, the Germans keep on fighting. They know they're going to lose, but they keep on fighting. Let's give them a fair peace. The idea. And so you remember the 14 points out of Wilson? Okay. At Versailles, they betrayed their word and showed how marketing trips you up and creates World War II. Because in World War I, at the end, it says, every German is going to have to be paying retributions for flooding the coal mines in Paris and outside Paris and destroying there. And so basically every time Wilson kept on saying, oh, we want a fair peace, we said, well, we're going to take you to the graveyard. See all those dead people? We need retribution. Okay. So how long would it take Germany to get out of just doing cuckoo clocks and beer and sausage? Till 1989 would have been their last payment, 1989. So what we have to think about here is, why was this environment set up for Nazi Germany? You need to go to the Reichstag. And outside the Reichstag, there are 92 steel plates with names on them. Those were the people in the Reichstag that stood up against Hitler that were assassinated. And that's, all of a sudden, Now let's look at a different model as if democracy matters. And this is important because this week, Henry Kissinger died at 100. He leaves a legacy of the power over, the same sort of thinking that power wins, and if you're not winning, you give more power. So here's a different approach. World War II. Who is our greatest allies today? Those who we fought against, and they fought against us. Germany, Japan, they're the ones that are close to us. Why? Because they thought as if democracy mattered. And so the ability to do the Marshall Plan, George Kennan, George Marshall, et cetera, to rebuild those economies. I mean, I've done a lot of research on what MacArthur did in Japan, and they were respectful of him because he respected their culture. It's as if democracy matters. So who are our closest allies today? Those we fought against because we used the ideas of democracy. Yes?
Can I have the clicker?
Mhm.
Okay. Let's go back to.
Here you go.
Okay. So what was the message that the founding generation sent down to us all those many years ago? It was not a set of answers to anything. It was a template, a blueprint of how we could go forward. Not specific answers, a structure, a framework, and an idea about democracy that allows us to use that blueprint, that template, and to review it, which we have not been doing lately, but to review it given a changing environment and to come up with our own answers.
We now have the power of the gods. I wonder how many here and online have seen Oppenheimer? That's the epitome of the 20th century. We have taken our Western civilization and our new sciences from 1620s of Francis Bacon, the new organ, the new science, and we are now at the end point. The question that the founders were thinking about was the art of assembly, not the art of dissembly and death. So it's a very different way of thinking. And that's the one message I want you to take away today is how to think differently. And the fact that we have become the British that we fought against 250 years ago because we got reverted back to the power paradigm. And that allows us to say we are no longer holding sacred the principles of a democracy. So it's the power over. So what's important about what you heard before about artificial intelligence, they're talking about technologies. But these are technologies that doesn't change your mind, the organization, and the way you interact with the world. And that's where the Americans were thinking about, we need to change the consciousness, the interaction, the framework for interaction. And so we're basically facing a new colonization with artificial intelligence. It's not all bad. It'll help predict cancers, et cetera. But it's also going to predict where you're going to do, and it's in the hands of the powerful. And that's where we have to be changing the approach there. And so we're saying that there is a democratic method as powerful as the scientific method, but it deals similarly with invisible dynamics that don't allow you to analyze it, to take it apart, to dissect it, and then try to rebuild it. Because the way you rebuild a world, the way you create life, the way God creates life is totally different than the functions of how you can sit there and manipulate it. So it's the citizen, and this is the book, a good book, Citizen, and there are many others about a movement that's happening to say, what is missing in action today? It is the citizen. And what's the citizen doing or not doing today? Because they become the consumers. And until we transition from consuming to this back to the citizenship, and I just think about how that transition needs to be going, that will be important. Okay.
So the bottom line, I'm not going to go through this entire slide, but the bottom line is the citizen and governance of the commons. Those are the counterweights to what we see in terms of the tyranny and oppression in the forms that we see them today going on around us. We, the citizen, is the counterweight. Okay, colonization.
So let's go back to the idea that we're facing a new form of colonization. And it's a power paradigm coupled with Western technology. And what's important about here is technology is not just an instrument. It's a way of understanding the world. Think about that. It's a way of understanding the world and organizing the world. Technology is not a human activity, but develops beyond human control. Technology is the highest danger, risking us only to see the world through technological thinking and colonizing policy and behaviors.
And today, we use this word colonization, and it's an old word, but colonization is still taking place today, just in very different forms.
And what's key about this, I mean, if you went back, colonization is predatory and parasitic. It takes the person. A quick example, I went to Home Depot, thought it was great. You can drive up, you order an item, and they bring it out to you, but you had to get an app. In the 64 hours I had that app, they tried to track me 2,200 plus times. And they had already sold it to Alphabet, and they had sold it to Google, my whereabouts. This is parasitic. You are the parasites are on you. Okay.
Go ahead.
So colonization is about power, both visible and invisible. And this is the hardest thing, is it's dealing with the invisible aspects of power. And how do you do with the three faces of power? So if there's anything I want you to take away with is we're dealing with invisible dynamics of power. Now, if you think about why they created the nation state, 2/3 of the Northern Germany population killed 1/3 because they had the wrong book and you were using the wrong words. They said, this is not good for our politics. So they got together in Treaty of Westphalia that said, we got a solution. Every one country will have one king, one religion, one culture, and you just have an inquisition for those that you don't like. That worked for a while. The Americans said, that's not working for us. We got people coming off the boat from all sorts of places, talking different languages, eating different foods. How are we going to get that diversity together? And this gives us the idea that in our age of technology, we are more primitive than the age of communication in the 1700s that they were thinking about. That is important because they have something in that bottle to teach us about power. So there's the decision-making power. Is it vanilla or chocolate? Is it Hillary or Trump? The choices you have are already pre-described. So that's the visible part of the invisible power. The non-decision-making power is what I saw in Chicago, Mayor Daley, who gets the garbage contract, backroom deals. There are over 2,000 lobbyists for basically each of our various congressmen and senators. That means there's a lot of backroom dealings going on that we can't see. That's part of the invisible dynamics. The most devious, that which is closest to Satan, let's say, would be ideological power, changing the narratives, changing the symbols. That's the simplest way that you have a lever to be able to move the world. And that's what's happening to us now, is they are working on your mind to be able to deal that ideological power. So think about this thing. When I'm looking at a problem, what's the explicit, what's happening around me? What's the implicit, backroom deals? And what is happening to my mind and what the axle points upon which my narratives are being spun? And that's terrifying. Okay.
Okay, I'm having a little problem here going back and forth.
Well, let me just give
Yeah,
you,
no, why don't you just talk about the Museum of Mistakes?
no, you have to go forward, one
Yep.
more. There we go. Here's a recommendation. In Edinburgh, home of Adam Smith, market economies, all the stuff that we are based on, they created something they saw as a needed, which was a library of mistakes, of trying to catalog how in our economic systems thinking, and we're so brilliant, are we making mistakes? So our proposal, one of our proposals from the forum, is to create a museum of mistakes here in Washington. So I want those on that are on the landing page. Let's give us these ideas of what you would like to see in a museum of mistakes. What are those things? It's not about people. It's not about things, and that's the distinction. The founders lived in a world very different than you and I, because it's not about the things, it was about relationships, interactions, living systems, not little things that we can put tail on the donkey of the nouns, and the donkey is doing this, the verbs. We need to go much deeper than that. Okay, so that's one of our recommendations. Library of mistakes. Let's figure out what you're gonna do about that.
Why don't we go down to, excuse me, the triangle?
Well, let's just do this one, next one,
Okay, the
exceptionalism.
exceptionalism of the American experiment. So what are we talking about here with exceptionalism of the American experiment? Excuse me. Think about how we learned, think about how we see, how we observed, et cetera. With respect to the American experiment, we started before 1776, where we were in a dependency state. We were a colony of Great Britain. However, the American experiment, the Revolutionary War, took us from slaves or serfs, I'm sorry, so slaves to serfs to subjects and finally to citizens. So we went from a state of dependency. Then we had the Revolutionary War. We declared ourselves free from what we considered our oppressors, our colonizing country. This was a half revolution, though. It wasn't an entire revolution, because it became very clear after we won that war that indeed something else was missing. We had the Articles of Confederation. They were not working. In fact, other countries were circling us again in order to take us over, even Great Britain, too. That made the founding fathers sit down and say, okay, we're not just going to make changes to the Articles of Confederation. Indeed, we're going to create something else entirely. We're going to complete the revolution. That something else was the Constitution of the United States. It took us from freedom to liberty. That was the important movement. Many revolutions that have been taking place for tens of years, hundreds of years, stop at that revolution. They don't take the next step to consider what is important about next steps.
Just a real interesting fact. A lot of the principles behind America were born in Britain. The idea of evolutionary common law. They had the Civil War, ideas of equality, all these things. And they then decapitated King Charles. And then they didn't know what to do. They couldn't make the next step from subjects to citizens. So they reinstalled his son. America was not going to make that same mistake. And that way of thinking differently, to go from subjects to citizens, is what's critical in America.
Let's take a look at the pyramid now.
Okay. But basically, so we've had three revolutions: independence, interdependence, the Constitution, and the continuing interaction each generation has to do in reestablishing. That's the third revolution. In July 4th, 2026, at our 250th, $3 billion will be spent in America for fireworks. $3 billion up in smoke. We had better be thinking better than that. Okay. You gotta click it to where you want.
Okay. It is, we're gonna do the triangle next.
Okay, this doesn't control it.
No,
This
no,
doesn't.
no, I'm saying here.
Okay. You can, want to talk about?
No, you.
Okay. This is kind of the quick summary. Everyone knows life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, right? Okay. That's, superficial. Let me just give you two quotes quickly. John Kennedy, Senator, Louisiana, said, "We were founded by geniuses and run by idiots." Now, I think that's a good, good for laugh type thing. But the profound one was done by Pete Buttigieg, who's the Department of Transportation head now. He wrote in the Crimson, "We have lost the struggle with language. The ability to look at the toxic and excruciating pain that has been given to our language means we don't know how to understand what freedom is, democracy. We don't need new words. We need to rediscover those words." And so here's just a slide. Everyone has a dollar bill. Yeah, dollar bill in your wallet probably. And they have this strange little eye up there. Okay. You can do historians, Hollywood all does interesting things about it. But here's the key. It was based upon living systems. The first line of the Declaration of Independence says what? What are these ideas based upon? The laws of nature and the God of nature. Not upon God, but nature. And there's great stories we can tell about how if you came over here with the crisp British accent, the right porcelain born through the correct set of thighs, you would die unless you started looking at the perceptions around you and were able to see. And that's what the citizen is about, is ability to see things that others can't see, and the power people do not want you to see. So how do you look at a living system? So the ideas here are the ability to identify your identity, the relationships, this is strange ideas of equality, and how you process information. So that's key, but that word patterns is what's missing in most people's understanding of governance. And that's where we really added value there. And we call that political alchemy. And that political alchemy allowed the transformation. And I'll say, what, if someone asked me, what was the American experiment back with so extraordinary? It's the ability to take the common and make it uncommon, to take the ordinary and make it extraordinary. That alchemy, that art of assembly that de Tocqueville talked about, that's there. Now, they had this various things, Pursuit of Happiness. And on Our First Penny by Ben Franklin, he says, basically, do your business. The words are actually mind your business, not mind your own business, mind your business. So do your thing is in your freedom, but you have to worry about the larger liberty and the larger concepts of life that allow the whole system to survive and prosper and thrive. Okay. Let me just do the next.
We are running out of time. And by the way, we had many more slides, but we're going to put them up on our website so that you can see the continuing conversation. I think what we have to think about now is there are 7 distinctions that we talk about with respect to the American experiment. We obviously are not going to be talking about all of those distinctions. Just for example, the whole notion of a network, creating a network. But just to give you a little bit of a flavor, excuse me, and to think about this architecture of the American experiment too. Why don't you go ahead and talk about this,
one distinction that, and I learned this from Mary Catherine Bateson, daughter of Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson. I said, this is a meeting of the American Cybernetic Society. I said, how could this ragtag military go against the most powerful economic, political, economic force of the day? And she says, it's simple. It's the committees of correspondence. So General Howe would say the average woman in her kitchen knows more about where my troops are than I do. because we set up networks, starting in Boston, the stagecoaches about where, so we were able to use networks to overcome the most powerful. And so that's just an example. So what does that tell us about what we need in the future in terms of recommendations? It really is that ability to look at how we network citizen action, the ability to learn at the local level. Okay.
Okay, these distinctions that we refer to actually are in two different categories. One, the first category is how these distinctions reflect how the founding generation thought. The second set of distinctions is about how the founding generation thought. And that thought becomes critically important because that in turn, how they thought has come down through us, through our Constitution and our Declaration.
Can you just go to this one here?
Pardon? No.
Can you go?
No. Let me just, I think we need to, sorry.
That means our time's up.
Yeah, our time's up. Second, well, we don't have time to go through all the distinctions. As I said, we're continuing them on our website. But why don't you go down to this right here?
So here's one of our recommendations. This is a mock-up of what we hope to be producing. The first one is basically the citizen. It's a national conversation of change. We're using Archimedes, and the lever point says, I can change the world if I have the right fulcrum and the longest lever necessary. So we're trying to create a manual and toolbox for the repair of America. And so I'd like people that are on the landing site to say, you know, what would you like to see? This will be published on July 4th about the missing in action citizen and what do we need to bring them back. The second one is for September 17th next year. That's the anniversary for the Constitution. So what do we not know about the Constitution? You'll hear recommendations here today from some of our panelists about how we continue that conversation. So that just gives you an example, whether it be the Museum of Mistakes or the Citizen magazine. It's basically a whole earth catalog of access to tools about citizenship. That's what we're playing. So that's the sort of the concreteness of when you go back and actually see how they thought and fought. We are far afield from where our foundations.
Thank you.
Okay. So-
Panel 2 will be coming up in just 10 minutes. And panel 2 is about rethinking.
Okay.
Mhm.
Makes sense. So questions,
Oh, I'm sorry. Made a mistake. Hold everything.
don't you-
Hold everything. I'm getting too excited about my own panel. Actually, our next presentation, in this panel, panel 1, is from Jerome Warren. And he's
Yeah.
going to talk about, indigenous peoples and their contributions, to our democracy. And then that will be followed by Morris Butch-Boson, who's going to talk about relationship between governance approaches and societal outcomes. Sorry. Okay. We are up for Jerome next.
So he's coming in remotely.
Yes. Tell me when you can see me, if you can see me.
Hello, Jerome.
Hello, everyone. Yes, so I would have liked to have been there. Life and demands and health and other constraints have prevented me from actually being there. But perhaps next summer I'll probably find some time to visit the US, and I'd like to be involved in these discussions, which I think are very important. So that's just the preamble. Let me now get to the talk, and I know there's lots of content to come up, so I don't want to monopolize the time. So as Valerie introduced, I'm Jerome. I'm currently coming to you from Berlin. The Reichstag that Christy mentioned, Lowell mentioned, is actually right down the street here, not very far. But that's not my topic. So my topic is indigenous sources to extend, deepen, and realize American democracy, which I've posed as a question. So this is more, so to speak, an impulse to to stimulate conversation and not any kind of conclusive scientific or analytical sort of framework. It's a conversation. So I start with these observations, and they're opinion polls from various polling organizations in the US about Americans' perspectives on their political institutions. And Lowell and Valerie have discussed these basically in their preamble just a moment ago. So basically, as you see here, New York Times, Siena poll, faith flags in U.S. government. Many voters want to upend the system. A majority of voters across nearly all demographic ideologies believe the system of government does not work. There is little trust in institutions like the Supreme Court, in the Congress, all these sorts of things. So 7 in 10 Americans say the country's in crisis, at risk of failing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to linger on these things, but of course it's an important element to this discussion. So mainly the question I think I would address is why is this the case, and to what extent can different elements shed light on how to get out of this crisis, which is a very, very important question, as has been said. So I think there's a thesis that the United States has always had two souls. I think this is in part what Lowell was getting at. This is from a book by a German anarchist, Rudolf Rocker, who basically outlined a tradition of liberal and even radical American thought. And he concludes the book with a very interesting observation, saying that along with the great path-breaking currents of liberal thought that Lowell outlined, basically with John Locke and others, there existed in this country, speaking about the United States from the very beginning, a whole line of backward and manifestly reactionary tendencies whose influence on the spiritual development of American life should not be underestimated. Furthermore, he says these currents are by no means to be considered merely as a consequence of the great land monopoly of the developing capitalistic economy in this country, which came more and more into sharp collision with the principles of Jeffersonian democracy, but in fact, they were already apparent, as he argues, in the first period of America's colonization. They developed and gained strength during the Industrial Revolution. These tendencies were brought over from Europe, just as were Locke's ideas and English liberalism in general. So that's Rudolf Rocker. To contrast that with this perspective from a very recent book that just has been making the bestseller list in many countries, and it's been translated in a number of languages. You see it here in Japanese and Dutch and Italian and Spanish and Portuguese, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber, the late David Graeber, and David Wengrow. And basically they say here this concern by European philosophers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau with inequality. He says basically the terms equality and inequality only began to enter common currency in the early 17th century under the influence of natural law theory. And as they argue, that natural law theory in turn arose largely in the course of debates about the moral and legal implications of Europe's discoveries in the New World. And they discuss Rousseau as one side of this coin, saying that today the popular version of this story is typically some updated variation on Jean-Jacques Rousseau's discourses on the origins and foundations of inequality among mankind. 1754, it was written. So they say, once upon a time, the story goes, we were hunter-gatherers living in a prolonged state of childlike innocence in tiny bands. These bands were egalitarian. They could be for the very reason that they were small. It was only after the agricultural revolution and then still more the rise of cities that this happy condition came to an end, according to Rousseau, ushering in civilization and the state, which also meant the appearance of written literature, science, and philosophy, but at the same time, almost everything bad in human life, patriarchy, standing armies, mass executions, and annoying bureaucrats demanding that we spend much of our lives filling in forms. So that's the happy to sad version of the story. As they say, Hobbes, Thomas Hobbes, of course, wrote the other version. Hobbes's Leviathan, as they argue, published in 1651, is in many ways the founding text of modern political theory. As they argue, it held that human beings, being the selfish creatures that they are, life in an original state of nature was in no sense innocent. It must instead have been solitary, poor, nasty, brutish. In short, as everyone knows this expression, basically a state of war with everybody fighting against everybody else. Insofar as there has been any progress from this benighted state of affairs, a Hobbesian would argue it has been largely due to exactly those repressive mechanisms that Rousseau was complaining about: governments, courts, bureaucracies, and police. So basically, both of these versions of the story are similar. It's the stages version of historical development, only that the coloring is, in Rousseau's version, the savage on the left would be happy, and the guy on the right with the hot dog stand would be sad, whereas in Hobbes's version, it would be inverted. Um, of course, a simplification. But basically, the idea is that Graeber and Wengrow and others say is that another story, in fact, is possible. They introduced what they call the indigenous critique, saying that basically we're going to retell the story assuming that all parties in the basically in the interaction between Europeans and Native Americans, the conversations of the colonists and their indigenous interlocutors were adults, and that they at least occasionally listened to each other, resulting in even familiar histories suddenly beginning to look different. In fact, what they argue is that indigenous Americans were not only confronted with strange foreigners, that they gradually developed, in fact, their own surprisingly consistent critiques of European institutions, but that in fact these critiques became to be taken quite seriously in Europe itself. As an example, they list Father Pierre Biard, a missionary theologian who basically in 1608 was assigned from France to evangelize the Algonquin-speaking Micmac in Nova Scotia. And basically, they didn't like each other, the French and the Micmac. And the Micmac thought of the French, you are always fighting and quarreling among yourselves. We live peaceably. You are envious and are all the time slandering each other. You are thieves and deceivers. You are covetous and are neither generous nor kind. As for us, the Micmac, if we have a morsel of bread, we share it with our neighbor, and so on. And so the French, as they said, had more material possessions, but in fact, the Micmac considered themselves richer than the French because they had other greater assets: ease, comfort, and time. And very quickly, just to relate this to David Ellerman's recent publication, Neo-Abolitionism, where he also is very critical of the of natural law theory, suggesting this distinction between consent and coercion is not the right one, but we should be talking about translation versus concession. And in fact, this is what one could frame the Native American mindset of, but I don't have enough time to talk about that. So again, what does all this mean? Why am I mentioning all of these theories and interactions?
Yes.
And in fact, if you look at the history of the analysis of how the American Constitution, again, we're talking about American democracy, arose, there has been an evolution there. So about 100 years ago, there was the view that the economic interpretation of the Constitution of the United States was the most logical, that in fact the colonies gathered together because there was a material interest in doing so. However, since that time, there has been much discovery and analysis of the interactions between, again, the Native American communities and cultures and the developing American colonies. And these are just 3 books that I will draw on, and a few others in my the remaining comments that I have. So by Barbara Graymont and by Bruce Johansen and his co-author as well, David Grind. And just to, again, to frame this, this is from Jerome Brunner's The Notion of the Spiral Curriculum. And in fact, we see these feedback effects. So people, we're learning again by preparing a state of mind. We learn by reading. We learn then, of course, beyond reading by doing. And there's a feedback effect from the mistakes based on what we have assumed prior to doing that influences and informs our thinking on a particular topic. So again, there's this circular or the spiral feedback that you see in the interaction between American colonists and native tribes. But anyway, so Grind and Johansen argue that colonial Americans, early colonial Americans, viewed American society not as some distinct European transplant, but in fact as a synthesis of Native American and European cultures. So you have examples like, everyone knows Tammany Hall, but the Tammany society on which this notion was based is for them a classical example of the blending of these 2 cultures. And even with phenomena like the Tammany Day, which is a kind of a mix of May Day and the European tradition and other holidays with the American environment, are for them examples of this. So in fact, in the Tammany Society, which many influential Americans belonged to, the American Indians were seen not only as a symbol, some kind of archaic notion that we give lip service to, but to members of the society in this first generation, the revolutionary generation, the American Indians, in fact, represented, as they argue, a wellspring of new ideas that freed Europeans from the antiquated ideas of class and autocratic government that had so long existed in Europe. So in fact, there was this constant interchange, and the leaders sought to study American Indian languages and ideas to inform their own new country. And as you see, of course, there is the imagery on the left here. You see Franklin and other founding fathers meeting with the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois, at their tree where the hatchet, so to speak, was buried in the Haudenosaunee Confederation that I'll get to just in a moment. And at the bottom, you see the first seal of the United States of America. And in the left talon of the eagle, which is on our right side, you see these 13 arrows, which is a direct transplantation of the symbol of the 6 nations of the Haudenosaunee, which were 6 arrows. And at the time, many American colonists thought of actually just using the 6 arrows. They decided it would be inaccurate since there were 13 colonies, but the imagery is there nonetheless. So as I mentioned, the Haudenosaunee are one of the largest inspirations for the founding fathers, as one says. And in fact, as Johanson and Grein argue, the Iroquois, which the French referred to the Haudenosaunee as, these were natives around the area of New York and in the southern parts of Canada, Ontario, this region in general. So they believe that the spiritual power of one person is limited, but when combined with other individuals in a hearth, in what they called an otiana or a clan, the spiritual power is enhanced. And they lived in these long houses, as you see here. And many of the founding fathers, again, spent time, this founding generation, I would say, there were founding mothers as well. They spent time in these long houses, which if you look inside of this picture on the top right, you see there are multiple families sharing a single dwelling, and the hearth, the fire in the center, was a place of social exchange. In fact, people were learning how to do democracy in the home, and then of course beyond the home in the village itself. So you're scaling these important interactions and socializing a deliberative culture. So in fact, when a person died in their culture, the public power was considered to be diminished. So it was very important for them, this idea of the clan, of the social. So the individual was not necessarily the center of the polity. In fact, the civilization was matrilineal. Men traveled to the tribe of their wives. And in fact, the representatives, you could say, the Congress, if you could call it that, and the representatives themselves were called sachems. And in fact, there are a number of sports teams still in New England called the sachems. And of course, a reference to the Haudenosaunee tribes. So they were in fact nominated by the clan mothers. So the women nominated the representatives. And they could also then remove or impeach a sachem that was found guilty of a number of abuses of office I don't need to get into. So again, all of these things were actually observed by people like Jefferson and others and influenced their thinking. And in fact, I'll make one more observation, that the sachems were not allowed to name their successors. So there was no legacy, and you were not able to carry the title to the grave. And in fact, so this was a very meritocratic institutions. The guarantee of freedom of religion and so on were very much important in the Haudenosaunee culture. In fact, forbidding the unauthorized entry of homes. So all of these things might sound familiar to you if you reflect on the Bill of Rights of the Constitution. So in fact, just one other comment on the Haudenosaunee, they had a federation, of course, of the 5 and then later 6 tribes that was promulgated and inspired by Hiawatha, one could even say statesman, and I believe he was Oneida. Yeah, and my partner is nodding his head, I'm right. And the origins of this league arose, in fact, out of the desire to resolve conflict. So it was the problem of the blood feud. So while families had conflicts, they dealt with them individually, an eye for an eye, as you're seeing now in Gaza, for instance, and that did not serve well for peace. So in fact, as long as justice and the monopoly on violence resided in the clans, there was no hope for peace and goodwill. So in fact, there was this fantastic meeting of the Seneca, the Cayuga, the Onondaga, the Oneida, and the Mohawks, and they ended up burying the hatchet. This is where the phrase comes from. They buried their tools and implements of violence under a tree that in fact became the symbol of the peace between these tribes. And the symbol that you see representing the Onondaga represents both the peace and this chain of connection, connecting basically these different tribes. So the procedure for deliberating policies once this confederacy was born is very interesting. And it began with the Mohawks, and the Senecas considered the elder brothers who would deliberate amongst themselves in reference to some particular policy. And after they debated, they sent this to the keepers, what was called they sent them to the across the fire, it was said, to the Oneida and the Cayuga, who were the younger brothers of the smaller tribes, who discussed much in the same manner. And once they were satisfied, they would then send this to the Senecas and the Mohawks again to confirmation. And next, the question was laid before the largest, the Onondaga tribe, for their decision. So you see this federalism, this idea of power that is not centralized, but that is placed at that level where it is the most reflective of the needs of the society. And so they permitted the maximum freedom to nations within the Confederation and individuals within the nation. There's always this emphasis on balance of powers. I don't have much time to get into other Native American tribes, but I just wanted to mention a few of the southeastern tribes who were also very influential in founding the United States. And these quotes are taken from a book by Duane Champagne called Social Order and Political Change, about exactly the five, or one could say six, southeastern nations, as the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, and the Creek. And the Seminole, of course, are the six that split from the Creek. But anyway, says that, so this is still from Grein and Johansson. They observe that travelers in the 18th century observed that subjugation is what these nations are totally unacquainted with. This goes back to what I was saying about Ellerman's notion of translation versus concession. There being no such thing as coercive power among them. And another contemporary commented at about the same time, it is by native politeness alone that chiefs bind the hearts of their subjects and carry them wherever they will. Now, Champagne suggests—
Thank you.
Jerome, thank you. We will, again, or Jerome will have his presentation up online, but could we go back to the last 4 slides of Lowell's presentation?
No, not the last ones.
I'm sorry,
Because leader, just,
Leadership.
I'm almost finished. Can I finish my presentation?
oh, go ahead, sorry.
This is just I'm getting to the end. The 4
yeah.
Southeastern nations, they have democratic political cultures that emphasize egalitarianism, consensus, and non-coercive political leadership and accountability as well. So the point I think that is very important to make, and I'll try to close this off very quickly, is that it was decentralized and locally oriented, with the fundamental political unit being the village. And of course, just to remind you that in the United States Constitution, cities have no sovereignty. It is states. So in the Cherokee and the Creek society, it was very different. The village was the unit that had the power. They could form coalitions, but they could also abstain. So just to say again, this is basically the conclusion. The lessons are that we need to spiral back again to the earlier stages of the American experiment, find a way to balance collective and individual freedom, using notions like subsidiarity, and in fact observe the fact that the natives abhorred greed and accumulation, and institutions like the Tammany Society, in fact, did seek to find ways to merge these two cultures. And so again, this is the last slide. Can a more fundamental dialogue, as I ask with the indigenous critique, help Americans rediscover a path forward? And this is just a book I'm editing currently, where some of these questions are dealt with, and my email address for anyone who has any further questions.
Thank you, Jerome. Thank you very much. And I am going to,
Jerome, you have an appreciative audience here. Thank you.
they're clapping. Okay, just want to go back to.
While she's doing that,
Okay.
the point is the contrast between the doctrine of discovery, which was done by the Papal Bull, that says any civilization you run into, Western Europeans, that don't look like you and eat like you have domination over them, versus this concept. Now, it was only in the past 10 years the doctrine of discovery was actually undone.
Okay.
Hello, this is the 21st century, and the doctrine of discovery was still on the books of the power over versus the power with, of, and by, and for.
Okay, just a little story. Benjamin Franklin, many people do not know that Benjamin Franklin actually made a trip to one of the longhouses to talk to the Iroquois Confederacy before the Declaration of Independence and the War of Revolution. And he went there to learn about their constitution. Their constitution actually went back 11,000 years. The Iroquois Confederacy Constitution. And what did he learn? What did he learn from that journey? Well, We actually have some words from one of the chiefs who was there. The chief said, the message that we have to you as you are engaged in this war is the following. The focus is on peace among all of your peoples. You must maintain the peace among all of your peoples. You must respect your peoples. And of course, he was talking about the 13 colonies. And very, very important, he focused on union. The union of the Iroquois Confederacy was incredibly important. Not the individual tribes, but the confederacy of all the tribes together. We did not remember all of these ideas that that chief shared with the American Congress, unfortunately. But this is what the Iroquois Constitution was all about. And people have asked, well, you know, the Iroquois didn't have a method for creating books and transcribing, you know, what their constitution is and writing it all down. And no, indeed, they didn't. But for thousands of years, they were able to pass that constitution down in a variety of ways, including through their art and through their beadwork. They incorporated the Constitution into their clothing, into their baskets, etc., so that every generation would have that continuity of understanding what the Iroquois Confederacy's Constitution was all about. Yeah, okay, I think that is it for this piece right here. So now we're ready for Morris Butch Boson. And Butch, come on up. You're going to be talking about, excuse me, relationship between governance and societal outcomes. So we'll turn this over to you.
Come in.
Here's your clicker.
Clicker will do it.
Clicker.
I'll do it. So, hi folks, I'm Butch. Boson. Can you all hear me without the mic?
I think you have to.
Can you hear me with, okay, now you can hear me. I'm Butch. So, I'm part of the rediscovery panel, but I'm going to turn the lens on to the present rather than the past. And, that's the end of it. Can we get back to the beginning?
You want to get closer?
Yeah, but how do I get back to the beginning? That's,
No,
He need-
left or right, you know, backwards.
Yeah. You have to, it's hard to click it, to be honest.
Yep.
Click it back. Click to the,
I'm clicking to the left.
click to the, over there.
We
Directly.
need to
Oh.
get, okay, we need to get back to the beginning of his.
Nothing's moving.
Let me try for you. Okay. Follow-up recommendations.
No, that's the last slide. And that's the last slide.
This one?
That's the last slide. You got to go backwards.
I'm going. What?
Hmm? Push what? Nothing's happening.
Nothing, it's not moving.
Not moving.
Citizen, okay,
That's the very last,
the last slide,
it's the next to the last slide.
okay.
It won't go back. Any help? Can you come up here and do it? It won't go above that one, and that's like the third of the last slide. No. No, no,
No.
no, I've got to go to the beginning. You need to go to the very first slide, and I can't do it.
Which file?
Is it?
While we're working
No,
on
no,
this, let me tell you a story.
You got the wrong, file.
Can you see the files?
Can you go back to the,
You have to give him the,
go to the sand, yeah, click on that. But there should be 3 files. Click on the slide, the bottom one. Yeah, that one. Now go back to the top. There, finally.
yay.
Yay.
You want to switch places?
I know. Okay, can you put it on, full screen?
Let's start talking.
Okay, here we go. Sorry, folks. So I'm taking a look at rediscovering using the present rather than the past. So basically, I'm looking at a cross-country analysis of how governance are affecting different societal outcomes, and particularly democracy versus authoritarianism. So my research questions are, number one, which forms of government are most highly correlated with positive societal outcomes? What are leading indicators of a fully functioning, what are the leading indicators of a fully functioning democracy? Are there certain structural features of a cross-country that are more likely to lead to better outcomes? Where does the U.S. rank among all of the world's democracies? Which countries are considered outliers, doing better than other countries in their regions? And what criteria should we be using to evaluate whether a democracy works or not? This is the path that I'm taking. The first path is a macro look at how countries rank, and this is what this briefing is about. What I'm moving toward is going in at a micro level to look at successful democratic experiments that are occurring all over the world. And I'm in the process of looking under the hood beyond just the national comparisons. And the third stage would be actually establishing a network, a technology-enabled network that connect all of these good, successful democratic initiatives that are occurring all over the world today. So my methodology was basically a correlation analysis. What I did was look at several different indices that are being used to rank countries based on different attributes, like how democratic these countries are. What are the leading indicators of democracy? Do they have a free press? Do voters turn out, et cetera? And which forms of governance are producing the better societal outcomes, like food security, healthcare? And some of the indices rank countries based on different structural characteristics, like the size of their population, how diverse they were, where they were located, et cetera. And basically what I did is a correlation analysis to determine which forms of governance produce the better outcomes. And a caution is that I use correlation, not causality. We all know the difference between correlation and causality. So this is the question, how do you evaluate whether a democracy is being successful or not? Are they by indicators such as educated voter turnout, or are they by outcomes like better food, better health, or both? So these are some of the quick results. The countries that did best in terms of democratization were the European countries. Let me go back. Sorry. These were the criteria that several index sources used to determine how democratic a country was. Civil liberties, is the government functioning satisfactorily? Is the political culture non-toxic, et cetera? These are all characteristics that they use to rank different countries in the world. And this is the question, do you define an effective democracy by their indicators, by their societal outcomes, or both? And based on those criteria and based on the different indices, these were the countries that ranked the highest, all in Europe, all older democracies, richer democracies in terms of per capita income, and all in Europe. And you have to ask the question, why? Why are these countries at the top of the list? This is a brief summary of the results so far. There's a strong correlation between the degree of democratization and political societal outcomes. But there are structural characteristics that affect those results. These are some of the specific characteristics of that were highly correlated with the democratic initiatives, societal outcomes. You can see that a free press, food security, anti-corruption, health systems were all highly correlated with governance, countries that had high levels of democratization. When you get to things like voter turnout, education, mortality, et cetera, not a very high correlation. So you could have a high voter turnout, and it does not necessarily mean that you have a high level of democratization going on. Then we looked at structural characteristics. Does location, culture, age of the democracy, population diversity correlate with democratization features and with good societal outcomes? The ones in blue are highly correlated. The ones in brown are not correlated at all. It doesn't make any difference how big your country is or the structure of your legislature. And by structure of legislature, I mainly mean, are they bicameral legislatures? Are they unicameral legislatures? Doesn't make a lick of difference in terms of structural characteristics that are related to democracies. I'm going to skip the next few slides. These slides are all indicators of how structural characteristics affect democracy in different parts of the world based on culture, based on how old the democracy is, et cetera. This is how the U.S. ranks. The little yellow circles indicate where among 160 countries the U.S. ranks based on the characteristics that you see there, how democratic, how free the press is, voter turnout, anti-corruption, health systems, food security, life expectancy, and wealth diversity. And I don't know whether you can read the countries at the top of the list, but they're all European. Yeah.
North Korea has a high voter turnout.
North Korea, and you'll see that in a slide or two. These are countries that are anomalous, that are performing better than other countries in their region. So I have Israel on the list. Israel is much more democratic than other Middle Eastern countries, but now you have to raise the question, is this still the case, given what's going on? These are the top-ranked countries in terms of voter turnout. You notice that they're all authoritarian countries. So the point here is that high voter turnout doesn't mean a thing when it comes to a fully democratic country. So here are my follow-up recommendations. I want to conduct a more in-depth country case analysis to determine what is causing these countries to be more democratic than other countries. I want to examine changes over time because this was a snapshot as of 2021. I think there is an application at the state and local level to look at some of these same structural characteristics to determine what is within the control of a local or a regional jurisdiction and what is not in their control in terms of getting a better democracy. My main recommendation is to establish a democracy extension service. And I've started to do some research on this. I've looked, with the help of ChatGPT, I've looked at over 100 individual examples of successful democratic initiatives. And you can see on the upper left-hand table, most of these successful initiatives are located in democratic countries. There's only one democratic initiative so far that's located in an authoritarian country. That's Rwanda in Africa. You can see on the left-hand table some of the methods that have been used in these local success stories. Online platforms, citizen juries, deliberative polling, online petitions, citizen assemblies, crowdsourcing, referenda. And on the right, you can see some of the specific topics that these successful initiatives have been addressing: climate change, gender equality, etc. So the bottom line is, in establishing a democratic or a democracy extension service patterned after the agricultural extension service, you need to go through these steps, and I think all of them need to be technology enabled. You have to collect the data, which I'm doing, which could be done much quicker through artificial intelligence and other technologies. You need to populate all of these stories in a standardized template, collecting specific information about each one. You need to curate the stories, establish categories, issue categories, methodology categories, so that you can collect common areas of interest. You need to design easy access to these stories. You need to connect the interested parties through a networking capability so that you can have a learning portal where these success stories can teach others who are having problems in the same issue area. And probably most important of all, you need to develop and implement an effective communication plan that enables people to have access to these stories and reconnect through a learning experience.
We have only 5 more minutes before the next panel. They have to work on the technology to get us all geared up for panel number 2. So that panel number 2 will be in the same room here, starting in 5 minutes. Thank you, Butch.
Okay. Thank you, Butch, and go to the landing site for comments, questions, etc. That's theforum.us.org/asif.